My name is Kevin. I'm a 25 years old working for a mid-sized company. Now, unexpectedly, there's a woman in a rough state right in front of me. Her hair, reaching her shoulders, is unkempt, and her body is covered in mud, making her face indiscernible. Clearly, she's a woman with some kind of trouble. Getting involved will likely lead to complications. Moreover, I have an aversion to women. The reason is my mother. When I was in the first year of middle school, my mother had an affair and left my father. Thus, until I became a working adult, I was raised solely by my father. No matter the situation, he always put me first. After the divorce, the first thing he did was to request a transfer to a department where he could leave work on time. Upon returning home, he would cook dinner, perfectly managing household chores like cleaning and laundry. The meals he prepared were always nutritionally balanced, considering my growing needs. Incredibly, he even started attending cooking classes. Throughout high school, he never failed to prepare a lunchbox for me for 3 years. Even though these tasks are challenging for a non-working housewife, my father managed them all while working alone. Now that I'm working, I understand how difficult this must have been. One day, I asked my father a question. "How do you manage to work so hard, Dad?" As I asked, my father stroked his chin, seemingly deep in thought. "Dad. Why, I wonder, I never really thought about it." My father was a kind and compassionate man. There's no need for a reason to work hard for others. He never spoke ill of my mother. The reason I'm going through such hard times now is because of my mother's affair. Despite the fact that it was her betrayal that caused all this, I respected and took pride in my father. That's why. How could you betray such a kind father? I harbored resentment towards my mother. Becoming an adult and starting to live on my own was a turning point for me, leading to my separation from my father. Entering society and living as an adult, I made a decision. That was to be a kind and compassionate person like my father. I'm not inherently good like my father. I even harbor resentment towards my mother, unable to be like him. But like my father, I can extend a helping hand to those in need. This resolve proved fruitful, with both work and personal relationships at my job going well. Though just a 25-year-old junior employee, I was entrusted with significant tasks for being able to provide thoughtful and compassionate proposals to clients. Surely, my father's innate character must have earned the trust of his clients and colleagues, allowing him to balance work and family life. Becoming a working adult made me realize my father's greatness anew. Speaking of which, there was another thing I did inspired by my father. No matter how busy, I made sure to cook for myself. Cooking at home is economical, and it allows for a nutritionally balanced diet. So, that day too, I headed to the supermarket to prepare a somewhat late dinner. The beginning of winter in November. Stepping outside, I noticed my breath turning white and realized it was that time of the year again. Today, I'll make a warm stew. After buying the ingredients for the stew, I left the supermarket. And so, I walked the usual path along the embankment to head home. Perhaps because it's Sunday night. From time to time, I pass by couples arm in arm. There's nothing warmer than cuddling up with your loved one. As a single guy, I can only envy them as I rub my numbing hands. That's when it happened. I noticed a woman walking under the bridge, catching my eye. What's going on with her? It would be odd even during the day, but it's night time now. Moreover, she seems to be unsteady on her feet, swaying significantly from side to side as she walks. At this rate, she might fall into the river. "Are you okay?" I called out to the woman. But whether she could hear me or not, she continued to stagger towards the river. This isn't good. I have to help. I ran down the embankment towards her. And then, I was taken aback by the woman's unusual appearance. Her hair, reaching her shoulders, was unkempt. Her entire body was covered in mud, and her face was unrecognizable. What could possibly have happened to her to end up like this? At that moment, the woman fell forward. Whoa! Instinctively, I caught her. Holding her, I realized she wasn't wearing a coat. I had no idea how long she had been under the embankment, but her body was completely chilled. Are you okay? Can you hear me? Her response to my call was faint. This is undoubtedly serious. I need to call an ambulance. I reached for my cell phone in my pocket. But then, the woman, who had been somewhat dazed, suddenly opened her eyes wide and grabbed my arm. I looked at the woman. At a distance close enough that our noses could almost touch, the woman looked at me with a pleading expression. It seemed like she was begging me not to call an ambulance. Are you hurt? The woman slowly shook her head. Do you feel sick or anything? She shook her head again. Surely, she has her reasons for not wanting to make a big deal out of it. I took my hand off the cell phone in my pocket and put the woman's arm around my shoulder. My house is just around the corner. Can you walk? Supporting the woman who nodded silently, I headed home. I brought the woman into my apartment, where I live alone. There's no time to think about how it's the first time I've brought a woman home. I immediately turned the heater to full blast, gave the muddy woman a towel and some of my clothes, and guided her to the bathroom. While she washed off the mud, I started cooking. The only thing going according to plan is that the meal is stew. After a while, the woman came out of the bathroom. My clothes were too big for her, but perhaps the warmth had helped. Her steps were steadier than before. I had been worried about not calling an ambulance, but at least she didn't seem to have any serious injuries, which was a relief. I had the woman sit at the table and asked, "Are you a college student?" She nodded. "Why were you walking alone under the bridge?" She didn't answer, keeping her head down. She seemed out of it under the bridge, but now it's different. I could clearly sense her. I don't want to answer intention. In that case, it would be best not to pry any further. I just smiled at her, trying to make her feel at ease. You must be hungry. Feel free to eat. Afterwards, I filled the woman's stomach with stew and had her sleep in my bed. I wrapped myself in a blanket and lay on the floor, watching her quietly start to breathe in her sleep before closing my eyes. The next morning, while the woman was sleeping, I left a note saying feel free to leave at your own pace along with a $50 bill, and then I went to work. I was concerned about the woman I left at home, but that day was one of the busiest times of the year, happening only 2 or 3 times. Having barely slept the previous night, I made some unusually large mistakes due to the lack of sleep. Is something wrong? You seem off. No, it's nothing. I shook my head while thanking a colleague who treated me to a coffee during lunch break to wake myself up. And then, as I returned to my department and was preparing for the afternoon's tasks, someone placed a hand on my shoulder from behind. When I turned around, there was my boss Michael, silently looking down at me. It was undoubtedly about the mistakes from the morning. But for him to suddenly place a hand on my shoulder, it was like a stereotypical scene of a boss about to lay off an employee. I could feel the blood drain from my face. However, my boss suddenly broke into a wide smile and said, "You took a college girl home yesterday, didn't you?" So, it wasn't about work. Indeed, my relief was short-lived. The matter of bringing a woman home felt like a significant issue in its own right. Considering she's a college student, she must be over 18, but... Yet, as I grew increasingly pale, my boss cheerfully patted me on the back. "Well done." That college girl was Mr. Wilson's daughter. Mr. Wilson wants to thank you, so go straight home after work tonight. Eh? What? Mr. Wilson is the president of Wilson Trading, the company I work for. I couldn't believe the woman I helped last night was the daughter of my company's president. While I was surprised by such a coincidence, I was relieved to know that the woman I had left alone in bed had safely made it home. That night, I headed to Mr. Wilson's house. Mr. Wilson took my hands at the entrance and thanked me with deep emotion. "Thank you so much for helping Sarah last night." As I was led into the living room, there was a luxurious steak spread, likely ordered in. "Please, eat as much as you like," Mr. Wilson said, sitting next to a young woman. Judging from the situation, this woman must be Mr. Wilson's daughter, the woman I helped, but I didn't recognize her at first because she looked so different from her disheveled state the night before. I never would have guessed she was this beautiful. "Do you drink?" "Yes, a little." I had the rare experience of being served a drink by the president. Let me say it again. Thank you for helping my daughter Sarah last night. When I came home, my wife said she hadn't returned from going out. I became really anxious. "I'm sorry, I should have contacted you if I could." "No, you're not to blame. Sarah didn't tell you anything, did she?" "No, she didn't." Embarrassingly, Sarah is like this even at home. It seems like she has some significant worries, but she won't talk about them to me or my wife. Sitting beside her father, Mr. Wilson, Sarah was silently looking down. Her face looked very pained. If Sarah is suffering, I, as a father, want to help her, but it's wrong to forcefully unveil what she chooses to hide. Mr. Wilson also looked pained. The agony of a father, being unable to help his beloved daughter. And the agony of Sarah, carrying burdens she can't share with her loving father. I think both their sufferings are hard to bear. Is there anything I can do for this father and daughter? As I was thinking this, Mr. Wilson spoke. "I heard you helped Sarah without asking for any details, even fed her your cooking and gave her $50. That's not something just anyone would do." "Not at all." I was moved to have such a compassionate and kind employee in my company. Mr. Wilson drank up a glass of wine. "Which brings me to a request." "What is it?" "I'll do anything I can to help." "Could you take care of Sarah at your place for a while?" "What?" I almost spilled my wine. "It's only until Sarah feels better." "Wait, are you okay with this, Mr. Wilson? Is it all right to leave your daughter at the home of a single man? Would you do anything to her?" "Of course not." "I thought so. You're a man of integrity, and it's with Sarah's consent." "Eh?" I looked at Sarah in surprise. Then, Sarah handed me my clothes, which she had borrowed and neatly folded. Seeing her face slightly downturned as if she was embarrassed made me feel a bit shy too. "My daughter can forget the taste of your cooking," he said. "Really? Are you really okay with this, Sarah?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed in a barely audible yet firm voice. "Please, could I ask this of you? You're the only one I can ask." With the insistence of a father who cares about his daughter more than anyone else, I understood, if that's the case, agreed to take care of Sarah until she felt better. And so, Sarah and I began living together. At first, it was awkward for both of us, but living under the same roof, we started to understand each other better. Sarah and I found we had similar tastes in food, music, and even books. One day, while I was reading an essay by a famous person, Sarah asked me, "Do you like reading essays, Kevin?" "Yeah, it's about sharing perspectives through the experiences of people I've never met, not because it's useful for life, but because I find joy in the sharing itself." Sarah went silent, so I suddenly felt embarrassed. "Sorry, I didn't mean to go on like that." "No, I understand completely. I often read essays too." "Is that so?" "I'd like to read an essay by you, Kevin." I'd like to read yours too, I began to say, but quickly stopped myself. Sarah doesn't want to talk about herself. Though she's become much more talkative since the day we first met, Sarah has never once spoken about her own life. So, I decide not to pry unnecessarily. I rethink my approach. However, Sarah noticed my consideration, and she was waiting for the day when her heart would be calm enough to share everything. One day, a few days after we started living together, as we were about to go to bed after having dinner together, Sarah began to open up. It was a shocking revelation. Actually, I've been harassed by my mother. What? I had suspected it was some sort of interpersonal issue. And since Sarah is beautiful, I assumed it involved a man. But to think it was from her family, and her mother, no less. Sarah continued as I reeled in surprise. She's not my biological mother. My real mother died when I was young. My current mother is my father's second wife. I see. The day you helped me, the harassment from my mother was particularly bad. I couldn't take it anymore and ran out of the house. But then I tumbled down the embankment and ended up in that state. Why don't you tell your dad? At my reasonable question, Sarah looked down, troubled. My dad loves my mother. I thought he would worry too much if he found out she's been harassing me. I just couldn't bring myself to say it. So that's how it is. But I know I can keep going like this. I need to tell him. So, Kevin, please, could you help mediate between me and my dad? I felt sorry for the suffering Sarah, but I was also glad. Glad that Sarah was reaching out to someone straightforwardly like this. And glad that someone was me. All right, I'll try to bring it up subtly with Mr. Wilson. I gladly accepted Sarah's request. Fortunately, the next day was Sunday. I promptly visited Mr. Wilson's home. But I was to encounter an even more astonishing truth there. When I rang the doorbell, I learned Mr. Wilson was out on urgent business. So, it was Sarah's mother who greeted me, not Mr. Wilson. Yes, the very person who had been harassing Sarah. No way. The person who opened the door was my mother. My mother, who had an affair and divorced my father when I was in middle school. How could you, leaving dad and now harassing your stepdaughter? I'll never forgive you. My mother seemed taken aback as I yelled without even greeting her, identifying myself as an employee of her husband's company through the intercom. But after staring at my face, she recognized me. Oh, Kevin, it's you, as if she saw the middle school me in the 25-year-old me. But there could be no heartwarming reunion. I resented my mother for betraying my father, and she, for her part, had insulted my father. You won't forgive me for leaving your father. I only need people who benefit me. Your father was a good-for-nothing man, only kind. I was sick of his low salary as a perpetual junior employee. How dare you? I trembled with rage at my mother's dismissive words. Dad is the best in the world. Even 100 of you wouldn't measure up to him. Yet, my mother was unfazed. Are you stupid? Such sentimental parent-child nonsense isn't worth a penny, further insulting my father and me. Even aside from the affair, I had always thought my mother was selfish and far from praiseworthy since I was in middle school. But I hadn't expected it to go this far. Becoming a working adult and having a clear view of things, the greatness of my father and the worthlessness of my mother became distinctly clear in my mind. Now, I'm living quite well as the president's wife, so, could you leave before my husband comes home? It's bothersome if you show up out of nowhere now. Saying this, my mother tried to close the front door. But then, I heard everything. Mr. Wilson emerged from the back of the room. Surprised, my mother turned towards Mr. Wilson. Why are you? I heard the loud voices, so I sneaked in through the back door to listen. I see. Seeing my mother visibly shaken, Mr. Wilson took a deep breath and yelled, You said the divorce was because of your husband's affairs and gambling habits. In response, my mother screamed back, her face turning red. It's true, the divorce and everything. It was all because of my husband's fault. Don't lie, my father would never cheat or gamble. You're the one who cheated, and you left my father. That's nonsense. You have to believe me. My mother ran to Mr. Wilson and clung to him. However, Mr. Wilson firmly pushed her arms away. I believe what Kevin says. Why? Because you're cheating now. What? I've been suspicious of you for a long time and had a private investigator check on your affairs. Saying this, Mr. Wilson presented the photos as evidence of her cheating. I was speechless. My mother, who betrayed my father, harassed Mr. Wilson's daughter, her stepdaughter, and also betrayed Mr. Wilson, who provided her a comfortable life. How low can she go? We're getting a divorce. Be prepared for the reimbursement of the money you've squandered. And so, my mother was expelled from Mr. Wilson's house. As she walked out of the front door, she looked defeated, as if she had aged 20 years, resembling an old woman. At that state, she wouldn't be able to ensnare another man. But just to be safe, I, not as kind-hearted as my father, accused her retreating figure, staggering right and left, wishing she would just tumble down the embankment. Afterwards, I was invited into Mr. Wilson's house. Having learned everything, Mr. Wilson thanked me again for taking care of Sarah but expressed deep regret. I never imagined she would harass Sarah. I failed as a father for not noticing. However, looking at me earnestly, he reflected, I wish to be a parent who my daughter can say is the best in the world. How is Sarah doing? She seems much calmer now. Lately, she's been showing her smile more frequently. That's great to hear, at least for this moment. To Sarah, you might be the best man in the world. Then, Mr. Wilson made a suggestion. If both of you agree, you can continue living together. I took in Sarah and Mr. Wilson's request. And because a caring and compassionate father would surely not ignore a troubled Sarah. But now, my reasons for being with Sarah weren't just out of kindness. As we spent time together, she became someone I needed. So, that night, I confessed my feelings to Sarah. The outcome can be inferred from the fact that Sarah continued to live with me. Our story goes on a bit longer. I've always enjoyed reading and writing, but I remembered Sarah saying she wanted to read my essays. So, I wrote an essay exclusively for Sarah. It was an essay about the days I spent with my father, sprinkled with humor. Upon reading the finished manuscript, Sarah said, "It's such a waste that only I get to read this wonderful essay. I wish more people could share in your father's experiences." Encouraged by Sarah, I submitted the essay I had written to an essay contest organized by a major publishing house. And to my surprise, it won a grand prize. Later, it became a bestseller known as a moving work. Following that, the publishing house decided to throw a celebration party, but would my father attend? I really want him to be there. And I want to boast about him on stage. About my father, the kindest and most compassionate man in the world. I prepared several convincing lines in my mind before picking up my cell phone.